So there I was, Jake Martinez, standing in the doorway of what had to be the most pretentious classroom in the known galaxy. The Xantharian Academy for Advanced Xenobiology looked exactly like what you'd expect from a bunch of aliens who thought they had everything figured out. Crystalline walls that hummed with some kind of energy I couldn't pronounce, floating desks arranged in perfect geometric patterns, and students who looked like they'd stepped out of a fever dream after eating too much expired cheese. The professor, a tall, spindly creature with 4 arms and skin that shifted between purple and green depending on his mood, was mid-lecture when I walked in. Professor Vextel, according to my schedule, though I was pretty sure that wasn't his real name. Probably something with 17 syllables and a sound that could shatter glass. "Ah," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone that screamed, "I have 3 PhDs and you probably eat dirt for fun. Our human exchange student has arrived. Class, observe the specimen." Specimen. Great. Nothing like being called a lab rat on your first day. The other students turned to stare at me with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for watching a train wreck in slow motion. There was Crix, a blue-skinned know-it-all with tentacles where hair should be, frantically taking notes on a device that looked like it belonged in a space opera. Blomp, who resembled a nervous potato with eyes, was practically vibrating with excitement. And then there was Zara, a sleek cat-like alien who gave me the kind of look that suggested she was already planning my funeral. As I was explaining, Professor Vextel continued, clearly annoyed by my interruption. Human dietary consumption patterns represent one of the most primitive ritualistic behaviors in the galaxy. Their feeding habits are chaotic, unsophisticated, and driven purely by base survival instincts. I dropped my backpack on the nearest floating desk, which immediately began scanning it with little blue lights. The whole thing felt like being in a really expensive airport security line, except the TSA agents had evolved from squid. "Take your seat, human Jake," the professor said, gesturing to what I assumed was a chair, though it looked more like modern art having an identity crisis. "We were just discussing how your species approaches nutritional intake. Quite fascinating from an anthropological perspective really. So wonderfully predictable." Oh, this was going to be fun. I could already tell that Professor Vextel was the kind of academic who'd studied humans the way other people studied bacteria samples. Lots of theories, zero practical experience, and absolutely convinced he knew everything there was to know about how we worked. I settled into the chair thing, which molded itself to my body in a way that was either incredibly advanced or deeply disturbing. The other students were still staring at me like I might suddenly start juggling fire or speaking in tongues. "Now then," Professor Vextel said, his skin shifting to a more confident shade of green, "perhaps our human friend can demonstrate some of these primitive feeding behaviors for the class. It would be quite educational." The way he said educational made it sound like he was planning to dissect me afterward for science. I glanced at the clock on the wall, which displayed time in what looked like alien hieroglyphics having a seizure. Based on my internal clock and the fact that I'd skipped the Academy's breakfast offerings, which appeared to be some kind of glowing purple paste, it was definitely time for actual food. "Sure, Professor," I said, reaching into my backpack. I was just about to have breakfast anyway. The collective intake of breath from the class was audible. You'd think I'd just announced I was about to perform surgery with a spoon. Crix's tentacles started writhing with excitement as he furiously scribbled notes. Fascinating. The human is initiating a feeding ritual in response to social pressure. Note the casual demeanor masking what must be complex cultural significance. I pulled out a loaf of bread, a jar of strawberry jam, some butter, a box of cereal, and a banana. Standard breakfast fare. Nothing fancy. Certainly nothing that warranted the look of absolute terror on Blomp's potato-like face. "By the 7 moons of Zephyria," Professor Vextel whispered, his skin now cycling rapidly between purple and green. "It's more complex than our xenobiological texts suggested." More complex. I was literally just unpacking breakfast. Zara leaned forward, her cat-like eyes narrowing. "The selection process appears deliberate. Each item must represent a different aspect of their nutritional theology." Nutritional theology. These guys really needed to get out more. I pulled out a plastic knife and started spreading butter on a slice of bread, completely unaware that I was apparently performing some kind of sacred ritual. The way these aliens were staring at me, you'd think butter was a controlled substance. "The human is now engaging in what appears to be a preparation phase," Crix announced to the class like he was narrating a nature documentary. "Notice how it uses the primitive tool to distribute the yellow substrate across the fibrous base material." Substrate, it was butter. On bread. I'd been doing this since I was 5. Blomp was practically hyperventilating. But why does it spread the yellow substance in that particular pattern? There must be symbolic meaning. Is it a map? A prayer? A declaration of territorial dominance? "It's just butter," I said, taking a bite of my toast. The entire class fell silent. Professor Vextel's skin went completely white, which I was pretty sure wasn't a good sign. "Just butter." Zara repeated slowly, like she was trying to decode a message from another dimension. But the ritualistic spreading technique, the precise coverage ratio, the methodical consumption pattern, surely there's deeper significance. I shrugged and reached for the jam jar. The moment I twisted the lid off, the room erupted in excited chatter. Apparently, opening a jam jar was the alien equivalent of watching someone solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. Secondary phase initiated. Crix shouted over the noise. The human is now accessing what appears to be a fermented fruit compound. Class, this could be ceremonial. Fermented fruit compound. They made strawberry jam sound like some kind of chemical weapon. I spread jam on another piece of toast, and the academic analysis reached fever pitch. Professor Vextol was now taking notes himself, his forearms moving in a blur as he tried to document every movement. The layering technique, he muttered to himself. First the yellow substrate, now the red viscous material. There's definitely a hierarchy here, a sequence that must be followed for optimal nutritional absorption. I was starting to feel like a lab rat that had accidentally learned to play chess. These aliens were reading way too much into what was basically me making a sandwich. Things went completely off the rails when I poured cereal into a bowl. You'd have thought I was performing an ancient summoning ritual based on the collective gasp that echoed through the classroom. It's compartmentalizing the feeding process. Blomp squeaked, his potato body trembling with what I could only assume was academic excitement. The circular vessel represents the cosmic cycle of consumption. I added milk to the cereal, and Professor Vextol actually stumbled backward. His skin was now flashing between colors so rapidly it looked like a broken disco ball. The white liquid, he stammered. It's introducing a completely separate biological compound into the mixture. Class, we may be witnessing a chemical reaction of unprecedented complexity. It was Cheerios and milk. I'd eaten this combination roughly 3,000 times in my life, and never once had it caused a chemical reaction more complex than making me less hungry. Crix was scribbling notes so frantically his tentacles were starting to smoke. The pouring technique follows precise ratios. The human maintains exact proportions between the solid particulates and the liquid medium. This suggests mathematical understanding far beyond our initial assessments. I stirred the cereal with a spoon, and that apparently broke what was left of their collective minds. Agitation phase, Zara announced, leaping to her feet. The human is now mechanically disturbing the mixture using a metallic implement. In Felixian culture, stirring is reserved for sacred ceremonies involving the appeasement of kitchen spirits. Among my people, added a slug-like student I hadn't noticed before, circular stirring motions are used to ward off digestive demons. The human must be performing some kind of protective blessing. I took a spoonful of cereal and ate it. Normal stuff, Tuesday morning behavior. But the way these aliens reacted, you'd think I'd just discovered fire. Professor Vextol was now pacing back and forth, his forearms gesticulating wildly. The consumption pattern is too sophisticated for primitive behavior. Notice how the human uses the tool to transport small portions rather than consuming the entire mixture at once. This suggests advanced planning capabilities and portion control awareness. Blomp added helpfully. It could be a ritual designed to extend the spiritual experience of nutritional absorption. Each spoonful might represent a different prayer or meditation. I peeled the banana, and the room went dead silent. Then Crix slowly raised one tentacle. Professor, he said in a voice that suggested he was about to announce the discovery of alien life. The human is now engaging with what appears to be a naturally occurring food source that requires manual preparation. The removal of the outer protective layer, Professor Vextol whispered, his eyes wide with what I was pretty sure was fear. It's demonstrating tool-free processing capabilities. Class, this contradicts everything we know about human technological dependence. I bit into the banana, standard banana eating procedure. Nothing revolutionary, but based on the aliens' reactions, I might as well have just performed surgery with my bare hands. The direct consumption method, Zara exclaimed. No tools, no preparation, no mixing with other compounds. This suggests the human possesses multiple feeding strategies depending on the nutritional target. A crystalline student in the back row started making what sounded like religious chanting noises. Among the silicate collective, consuming food in its natural state is considered the highest form of spiritual enlightenment. The human may be achieving transcendence through breakfast. Professor Vextol was now frantically consulting what looked like a digital textbook, his skin cycling through colors I didn't even have names for. None of this matches our research data. The complexity, the variety, the apparent spontaneity of selection. We may need to completely revise our understanding of human cognitive capabilities. I finished the banana and looked around the classroom. Every alien eye, sensor or optical organ was fixed on me with the kind of intensity usually reserved for watching someone defuse a bomb. "What?" I asked, genuinely confused by all the staring. The question seemed to short-circuit whatever was left of their academic composure. Blomp fell off his floating chair. Crix's tentacles tied themselves in knots, and Professor Vextal's skin went completely transparent, which was either really impressive or deeply concerning. That's when I made what would later be recorded in Xantharian Academy history as the critical error. I pulled out my thermos of coffee. The smell hit the room first. You know that rich, earthy aroma that makes Monday mornings bearable? Well, apparently to alien noses it smelled like the apocalypse was brewing in a cup. A reptilian student near the window started hissing. Not angry hissing. Terror hissing. Like someone had just told him his planet was about to explode. "What is that odor?" Zara demanded, her fur standing on end. "It smells like burnt plant matter mixed with liquid darkness." "Coffee," I said, unscrewing the thermos cap. Steam rose from the opening and I swear 3 students in the back row fainted. Professor Vextal was now consulting multiple devices simultaneously, his 4 arms moving in a blur of panic-driven multitasking. "Coffee. Coffee. Class, this is not in any of our human behavioral databases. We're in completely uncharted territory." I poured the coffee into the thermos cup, and the sound of liquid hitting plastic apparently triggered some kind of primal fear response in half the class. Blomp had crawled under his desk and was making whimpering noises. "The human is preparing to consume a heated liquid of unknown composition," Crix announced, though his voice had gone up about 3 octaves. "The thermal properties suggest a temperature that would be lethal to most known life forms." "Maybe it's a test of endurance," suggested a purple blob-like student whose name I'd never caught. "Like those ritualistic fire-walking ceremonies on Proxima 7. I took a sip. Normal coffee. Little bitter, but that's what you get from Academy vending machines. The aliens, however, reacted like I'd just chugged molten lava while juggling chainsaws. "It's consuming the burning liquid," screamed a student who looked like a cross between a crab and a filing cabinet. "This is beyond comprehension." Professor Vextal was now frantically pressing buttons on what appeared to be an emergency communication device. "Yes, this is Professor Vextal, in Xenobiology Wing 7. We have a Code Orange situation. Possibly Code Red. The human specimen is exhibiting behaviors not documented in any known database." I paused mid-sip. "Code Orange. What's Code Orange?" "Unprecedented biological activity requiring immediate academic intervention," Blomp squeaked from under his desk. "Code Red means potential threat to faculty understanding of universal order." Well, that escalated quickly. The emergency response team arrived faster than pizza delivery on Earth. 3 senior faculty members rushed into the classroom, followed by what appeared to be the alien equivalent of a hazmat squad, complete with scanning equipment and protective gear. "Where's the anomaly?" demanded Dr. Kethrel, the Dean of Xenobiology Studies, a towering insectoid creature with compound eyes that reflected light like disco balls. "There," Professor Vextal pointed at me with a trembling arm. "The human is engaging in liquid thermal consumption practices completely outside established parameters." I held up my coffee cup. "It's just coffee, guys." Dr. Kethrel's compound eyes focused on the cup with laser intensity. "Just coffee," she repeated slowly. "Student, are you aware that you're consuming a liquid at temperatures that should cause severe internal damage to your digestive tract? It's like 150 degrees. I said. "Maybe 160. Pretty standard." The hazmat team immediately started scanning me with devices that beeped and hummed and occasionally made sounds like dying robots. One of them, a gelatinous creature in what looked like a spacesuit made of bubble wrap, turned to Dr. Kethrel with obvious panic. "Dean, the human's internal temperature readings are within normal parameters. The thermal liquid appears to be causing no damage whatsoever. This contradicts everything we know about carbon-based life form heat tolerance." Another faculty member, who resembled a walking tree with attitude problems, started consulting a tablet the size of a small car. "According to our biological models, consumption of liquids above 40 degrees Celsius should result in immediate tissue damage. The human is drinking something nearly 4 times that temperature and appears to be enjoying it." "I am enjoying it," I confirmed. "It's actually pretty good coffee for institutional stuff." That comment caused Dr. Kethrel to start making clicking sounds that I was pretty sure indicated severe academic distress. "The human rates the liquid's quality," she announced to the room. This suggests not only tolerance but preference development. Class, we're witnessing adaptive behavior that challenges fundamental assumptions about thermal consumption limits. Professor Vextel was now surrounded by floating holographic displays showing what looked like my vital signs chemical analysis of my coffee, and probably my high school transcript for all I knew. The liquid composition is approximately 98% water with trace organic compounds, he reported, reading from one of the displays. Nothing that should produce the observed behavioral responses. I took another sip, and a student near the front row started hyperventilating into what appeared to be an alien paper bag. Perhaps, suggested Kritz, who had finally untangled his tentacles. The human has developed some kind of internal heat regulation system we haven't documented, like those volcanic fish on Kepler 442b. Or, added Zara, the liquid serves a function beyond nutrition. Maybe it's a drug, a stimulant to enhance cognitive performance. Well, she wasn't entirely wrong about that part. Fascinating theory, Dr. Kethrel said, her compound eyes now focused entirely on me. Human Jake, does this coffee substance alter your mental state? I shrugged. I mean, I'm more awake, less likely to fall asleep during morning lectures. You know, basic stuff. The entire academic staff exchanged looks that clearly translated to "oh no, we've discovered something way above our pay grade." I finished my coffee and set the empty cup down on the desk. The sound of ceramic hitting the floating surface created what I can only describe as the most awkward silence in galactic history. 40-something alien academics, 3 emergency response teams, and enough scanning equipment to launch a space mission, all staring at me like I'd just performed actual magic. So I said, looking around the room at the sea of bewildered faces, tentacles, and optical sensors, what exactly is the problem here? Dr. Kethrel's compound eyes started rotating in different directions, which I was learning was the alien equivalent of a nervous breakdown. The problem, Human Jake, is that you've just demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally challenge our understanding of your species' biological limitations. By eating breakfast, the question hung in the air like a bad smell. Professor Vextel, who had been frantically consulting his databases for the past 20 minutes, slowly looked up from his displays. His skin had settled into a sickly gray color that didn't look healthy. Human Jake, he said carefully. Like he was explaining quantum physics to a particularly slow goldfish, in the past 37 minutes, you have demonstrated thermal liquid consumption at lethal temperatures, complex multi-phase nutritional preparation involving precise chemical combinations, tool-assisted and tool-free consumption methods, and cognitive enhancement through controlled substance intake. I blinked. I had toast, cereal, a banana and coffee. Exactly. Blomp emerged from under his desk, his potato body vibrating with what I now recognized as existential confusion. You describe these as simple actions, but the complexity we've observed suggests advanced biochemical engineering, possibly enhanced digestive systems, and thermal regulation capabilities that shouldn't exist in baseline human physiology. The tree-like faculty member was still consulting his car-sized tablet, branches rustling with academic frustration. Our xenobiology databases contain detailed analyses of human dietary behavior based on centuries of observation. None of it matches what we've witnessed today. Wait, I said, a horrible thought occurring to me. What exactly do your databases say about how humans eat? Dr. Kethrel gestured to one of the holographic displays, which immediately showed what appeared to be a nature documentary. The narrator's voice was pompous enough to make Professor Vextel sound humble. The human approaches its nutritional source with primitive tools, the recording announced over footage of someone eating with what looked like wooden implements. Consumption is typically limited to single-item intake, with minimal processing capabilities. Thermal tolerance rarely exceeds body temperature, and feeding behavior follows predictable patterns based on survival necessity. I stared at the display. This is completely wrong. Where did you get this footage? The Galactic Xenobiology Institute, Professor Vextel said proudly. The most comprehensive database of sentient species behavioral patterns in known space. Well, your database sucks, I said. This looks like someone filmed a historical reenactment from the Renaissance Fair. The room went dead silent again. You could have cut the tension with a butter knife, which based on their earlier reactions, they would have probably classified as an advanced engineering tool. Crix raised a tentacle tentatively. Are you suggesting our scientific understanding of human behavior is inaccurate? I'm suggesting your scientific understanding of human behavior is completely ridiculous, I said. We've had coffee for like 600 years. We've been eating cereal since the 1800s. This isn't advanced biochemical engineering. This is Tuesday morning. Dr. Kethral's clicking sounds intensified to the point where she sounded like a broken printer. But the thermal consumption, the complex preparation methods, the multi-item nutritional combinations. It's breakfast, I interrupted. Basic, everyday boring breakfast. Every human on Earth has probably done exactly what I just did at least 1,000 times. The implications of this statement hit the room like a meteor. Professor Vextal's skin went completely white again. Blomp fell off his chair. Again. The hazmat team started backing toward the door like they'd just realized they were standing next to a nuclear reactor. Every human, Dr. Kethral whispered. Pretty much, yeah. I mean, some people prefer pancakes, or eggs, or whatever. But the basic concept of eating multiple foods in combination while drinking hot beverages. That's like, human 101 stuff. The gelatinous hazmat team member turned to his colleagues. If the human statements are accurate, we've fundamentally misunderstood the baseline capabilities of an entire species. Not just misunderstood, added the tree-like faculty member, his branches drooping with what I assumed was academic depression. We've been teaching incorrect information to students for decades. Our entire xenobiology curriculum is built on faulty data. Professor Vextal slowly sank into his chair, which immediately began adjusting to support his apparently deflated ego. I've published 17 papers on human nutritional behavior. I'm considered the leading expert in the field. Well, I said, trying to be diplomatic, maybe consider updating your research methods. That's when Zara, who had been unusually quiet during the revelation, suddenly perked up. Wait, if human breakfast behavior is this sophisticated, and you consider it basic, what do humans do for complex meals? The look of horror that crossed every alien face in the room was priceless. You'd think she'd just asked about humanity's secret planet-destroying weapons program. Oh no, Dr. Kethral whispered. What's dinner like? 3 weeks later I was sitting in the same classroom, watching Professor Vextal attempt to rebuild his entire academic career from scratch. His skin had settled into a permanent shade of humble beige, and his 4 arms moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned not to make assumptions about anything ever again. Today, class, he announced to a room full of shell-shocked alien students. We will be observing human Jake prepare what he calls a snack. The terror in his voice was palpable. The Academy had completely overhauled their human studies program after what the administration was now calling the breakfast incident. They'd brought in emergency consultants from across the galaxy, established new research protocols, and installed what appeared to be enough monitoring equipment to track a small moon, all because I'd eaten toast and drank coffee. Crix had switched his major to comparative uncertainty studies, which was apparently a new field they'd invented specifically to deal with the psychological trauma of realizing everything you thought you knew was wrong. His tentacles still twitched whenever someone mentioned butter. Blomp had developed what the Academy counselors called academic anxiety syndrome, and now required emotional support from a small fluffy creature that looked like a cross between a hamster and a cloud. The creature made soothing humming noises whenever Blomp started hyperventilating, which was roughly every 15 minutes. Zara had taken the revelation better than most, probably because cats are naturally suspicious of everything anyway. She'd appointed herself the official human behavior reality check for the class, which mostly involved her saying things like, "Are you sure that's not just Jake being normal?" Whenever someone proposed a new theory, Dr. Kethral had been promoted to Dean of Revised Xenobiology Studies and spent most of her time issuing formal apologies to other academic institutions across the galaxy. Apparently the Xantharian Academy's faulty human research had been the gold standard for decades, and correcting centuries of misinformation was turning out to be a full-time job. But the real changes were in the classroom itself. They'd installed what they called assumption prevention protocols, which basically meant that before any student could propose a theory about human behavior, they had to check with me first. "Human Jake," Professor Vextal said carefully. "Before we begin today's observation, could you please confirm that the food items you've brought are within normal human consumption parameters?" I looked down at my bag, which contained a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, some chips, and a can of soda. "Yeah, this is pretty standard stuff." The collective sigh of relief from the class was audible. "Excellent," Professor Vextal said, making notes on a tablet. "Now class, remember our new research methodology. We observe without interpretation, document without assumption, and always verify our conclusions with the primary source." It was like watching a nature documentary where the narrator had developed severe trust issues. I pulled out my sandwich, and the class watched with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for defusing bombs. But this time, instead of wild speculation, they waited for me to explain what I was doing. "So this is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich," I said, unwrapping it. "Pretty basic lunch food. Peanut butter is ground up peanuts mixed with oil and salt. Jelly is fruit preserves. Bread is, well, bread. Crix raised a tentacle tentatively. And the purpose of combining these elements is, it tastes good and it's easy to make. The simplicity of the answer no longer sent them into academic spirals. They'd learned to accept that sometimes human behavior was exactly as straightforward as it appeared. Fascinating, Professor Vextel noted. The human prioritizes flavor compatibility and preparation efficiency. This suggests practical decision-making rather than ritualistic behavior. I took a bite of the sandwich. Pretty much, yeah. The Academy had also started a new exchange program, bringing in humans from Earth to help correct their research. Apparently my breakfast demonstration had convinced them that they needed to study humans in their natural habitat rather than relying on outdated observational data. My roommate Dave from Michigan had caused almost as much chaos as I had when he demonstrated something called making a smoothie. The sight of him throwing fruit, yogurt and ice into a blender and then drinking the results had required intervention from the Academy's crisis management team. The human Dave has created a liquid meal by mechanically destroying solid food items, the incident report had read. This suggests tool-assisted molecular reconfiguration capabilities, previously unknown to science. Dave had just laughed and offered to make them smoothies too. Half the faculty had declined on the grounds that they weren't ready for that level of nutritional complexity. As I finished my sandwich and opened my can of soda, I realized something funny. The aliens had been so focused on understanding human behavior that they'd forgotten to actually ask humans about it. All their research, all their theories, all their academic papers had been based on watching us from a distance and making assumptions. The hiss of the soda can opening caused a brief moment of tension, but the class had learned to wait for my explanation before panicking. Carbonated beverage, I announced. Sugar, water, artificial flavoring and carbon dioxide gas for the bubbles. And the bubbles serve what function? Blomp asked, his support creature humming gently on his shoulder. They make it fizzy. It's fun. Fun. That was a concept that hadn't appeared in any of their human behavioral models either. Professor Vextel made a note on his tablet. Human behavior incorporates elements of enjoyment beyond basic survival requirements. This explains numerous previously inexplicable actions. I raised my hand. Professor, can I ask you something? His skin immediately shifted to nervous purple. 3 weeks of having his worldview demolished had left him with a healthy respect for human questions. Of course, human Jake. Why didn't anyone just ask a human about this stuff before? Like we're not exactly secretive about eating breakfast. The question hung in the air like the smell of burned coffee. Professor Vextel's skin cycled through several colors before settling on embarrassed orange. We assumed our observational methods were sufficient, he admitted. It never occurred to us that direct communication might yield more accurate data than long-range behavioral analysis. So you've been studying humans for centuries without actually talking to any of us. In our defense, Dr. Ketherall said, appearing in the doorway with her usual impeccable timing. Your species was classified as primitive based on our initial data. We didn't consider you capable of sophisticated self-analysis. I finished my soda and looked around the room at 40-something alien academics who had just spent 3 weeks having their entire understanding of intelligence and sophistication turned upside down by a guy eating cereal. Well, I said, maybe next time start with a conversation instead of a research paper. The Academy had already announced plans to revise their classification system for primitive species. Apparently, my breakfast had triggered a galaxy-wide re-evaluation of which civilizations were actually advanced, and which ones just thought they were. As for me, I'd become something of a celebrity. The human who revolutionized xenobiology with toast and coffee. Students from across the galaxy were requesting transfers to the Academy just to observe normal human behavior. I'd been offered book deals, speaking engagements, and my own research grant to study human everyday activities and their implications for galactic understanding. All because I'd eaten breakfast. And the best part, the Academy cafeteria had finally gotten a decent coffee machine.